everybody. Terry, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, Scott, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I think everyone is going to love this conversation. There is a lot to get to. You have lived an unbelievable life so far, and you have a lot more to go. But I mean, just to, like I said in the intro here, I mean, Division I basketball player, overcoming cancer, SWAT. I mean, that just was to me, I want to hear all about that. There's so many different things that you've done. So I think let's just kind of start at the beginning. Let's give the audience a little bit of a background on kind of how you got to where you are today. And kind of we'll go from there.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball at the Citadel. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher on the University of Notre Dame's baseball team. I have another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So I sort of joked that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything, that was going on in front of you. But our 5'8" mother was the boss. I mean, it didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were, whatever mom said, that's 5'8". The way it went. So, I graduate from college. I am the first person in my family to graduate from college.
Congratulations.
And I move home to find a job. And I'm really going to date myself now, but this is long before the internet was available to help people find a job. Fortunately, I find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. Unfortunately, I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. You talked a lot about my professional career, so I really won't get into that very much. For the last 10 years, though, I've been battling a rare form of cancer and still battling it. I get treated every 3 weeks. I have tumors in my lungs. And then I guess just finally to round it out, my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow. Wow. I mean, there's just so much there. And then you're also a motivational speaker and author, correct?
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2020. I made the brilliant business decision to start a motivational speaking business right as COVID hit. So, I wouldn't take any business advice from me whatsoever, but like everybody else, when COVID hit, you had to find a way to retool or found a way to deliver your message. And somebody had reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And Scott, my honest to God truth, when I said to him was, what's a podcast? I had absolutely no idea what a podcast was. And he explained it to me. And I'm like, yeah, sure. When I first started, not that I'm that much better, but when I first started, I was terrible. I had Post-it notes all around the camera, and there would be a question asked, and I'd be like, well, the answer to that is, and I would read the Post-it note. I mean, that's how bad I was when I got into it. And about a month ago, I did a podcast with a former NFL player, and we were talking afterwards. And he said, Terry, when I started this, I was scared to death. And I'm like, you were afraid too, when you started. So, I mean, we're all kind of, we think we're more than we are in a lot of cases. And in a lot of cases, we're just people trying to connect with each other. And I really think that was, when I finally realized that, it was like, look, I'm going to do the best I can, but I'm certainly going to make mistakes along the way. So, you know what, just do the best you can and see where it takes you.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So and we're going to get to a bunch of these topics, and I want to give everyone, because I know they're like, oh my God, talk about this, but I want to kind of preface the conversation. So you're a motivational speaker. You wrote you're the author of the book, I think, The 10 Principles to Living an Extraordinary Life. I don't want to botch the title there.
Yeah, Sustainable Excellence, The 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. Right.
Love that. So I guess, you're a motivational, exactly what do you motivate people to do? And then what would you say, how do you do that exactly?
Yeah, I mean, people, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Like I help people find and live their uncommon and extraordinary life. That's usually the answer that I give, although I usually give it quicker than that. And how do I do that? I do that by telling my story. And I don't mean to sit here and say that I have all the answers. I don't. I mean, I always say, look, this is what I've been through. And these are the things that I've learned during that, whether it's the 10 principles, whether it's the 4 truths, whether it's what I call my 3 F's, faith, family, and friends, of what has gotten me through this. And I put it out there and I said, look, if it works for you, then take it and incorporate it in your life. If 1 or 2 things work for you, then take those and incorporate them in your life and develop your own truths, principles, whatever you want to call them in your life. So it's not real hard. It's not real sexy. I'm not that smart. It's just, hey, here's my journey. Here's what I've learned along the way. Maybe it can help you as well.
Love that. So I think the most interesting, or one of the most interesting topics is SWAT. I mean, I don't think I've ever talked to someone in SWAT, specifically a hostage negotiator. So I guess maybe run us through how you kind of got into that, and then maybe some lessons learned that you kind of took with you from being in SWAT to, okay, like I learned this from here, and now I can teach people and kind of what not to do.
Sure. So SWAT, to me, and I've always wanted to be in my life associated with the best, whatever it was doing. I wanted to be the best at it. And sometimes I did that, sometimes I didn't. But usually in a metropolitan police department, in a sheriff's department or something like that, SWAT are usually the best officers. They have the best training, the best equipment, and things like that. And so SWAT is usually divided up into 2 groups. One are the tactical teams, which they have all the toys, the guns and the armored cars and all that. And then there's the negotiators, and we're the people, behind the phone or on the other side of the door. And if we do our job, then the tactical team doesn't get to use all their toys and stuff like that. So there's sort of a little bit of a conflict. Not really. There isn't. We work very well together. But so I was a police officer. There was an opening on the negotiating team. I had to do a physical fitness exam. I had to meet with a psychologist. I had to take written psychological exams. I had to meet with the team. I had to meet with the supervisors. And it was kind of an all or nothing thing. If one person on the team said, no, we don't want Tucker on the team, then you didn't get on the team. I mean, we worked very closely with each other, so we had to get along. I mean, if there was somebody that was a head case or, thought they were all that, then it wasn't somebody we wanted on the team, because that just hurts the dynamic. So I was lucky enough to pass all those things. And then I started my training. And the training is really, we work with a psychologist. There's a psychologist that comes to every training, and we talk about things. And the way we train is we just develop scenarios and we practice them on each other. And I'll never forget my first scenario. It was basically a person who had taken a hostage behind a locked door. And so I'm negotiating through the door with the person, and the hostage the whole time is sort of screaming, help me, help me, help me. I spent the entire time talking to the hostage. I totally ignored the hostage taker, and that was the big criticism. It's like, you realize you're supposed to negotiate with the guy who took the hostage, not really talk to the hostage. Guess I got a lot to learn. And so that started the progress. And the way we do things is, yes, there's a primary person talking to whoever the individual is. Sitting right next to them is another negotiator that's listening, but not saying anything. And then there are 3 or 4 more people doing what I used to call working the crowd, talking to family, friends, relatives, whatever. Why are we here? What precipitated this? What do you think would work to get them out, and things like that? So you as a primary may get a note from your secondary that says, don't talk about his mother. Because the people in the crowd found out that he and his mother had a big fight, and he took his wife hostage or something like that. So that's kind of how it works. There was a movie back in the 90s that Samuel L. Jackson played the negotiator. And everybody asked me, is that the way it is? No, that is absolutely not the way it is.
Just about to ask, have you seen the movie The Negotiator with Kevin Spacey and Samuel L. Jackson? Is it like that? Like, is that what it's like? Like, so
no, we do it as a team. There's not, Samuel L. Jackson was like Superman, yeah. He did everything. And it's like, no, sorry, we're not that good. We work as a team. But some of the things I learned, if you think about a police officer, about 99% of what we do is face-to-face with another individual, whether we're pulling you over to give you a ticket, or we're answering a radio run, to a fight, whatever it is, it's face-to-face. And so you can see visual clues. If somebody's balling up their fists, maybe they want to fight you. Or if you're talking to them and they're kind of, looking around, maybe they want to run. Maybe they're looking for an avenue where they can run and stuff like that. So you can do things. You can sit them down. You can handcuff them. You can put them in your car, whatever is appropriate for why you're there. But as negotiators, we weren't with the person we were negotiating. So we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And the biggest overarching part of being a negotiator is developing trust. And if you think about it, it's the same kind of trust for a husband and wife, a parent, child, a boss, a subordinate, whatever it is. But you're trying to develop that trust with somebody you've never met before, and you're trying to do it as quickly as possible. And there were times we would, we'd spend hours over here talking about something with the person when the real problem was over here, but they didn't trust us enough to tell us what was going on. And so what we would do is ask open-ended questions. We would get them to talk, and then we would parrot back to them the important things that they said, and we would attach an emotion to it. So if somebody's ranting and raving and yelling and screaming, and we parrot something back to them and say, "Oh, you seem a little upset," you totally missed the boat there. And so you're not developing trust. You have to get down in the weeds, in the mud with these people, which is why it's so exhausting after several hours of, trying to mirror their emotions and things like that, so that you can develop that trust. And then I'll end it with this. One of the things that we always used to do was ask how and what questions, because what those were doing, and the person really didn't realize this, was getting them to engage with us to find a way to get them out. How do you think we can resolve this? Okay, now all of a sudden they're putting on their thinking cap and saying, well, maybe this or maybe that. And we had people tell us, look, I'll come out, but you got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, we never lied to people. We would have to say, you know what? When you come out, you are going to go to jail. But then we would deflect the conversation to something a little more positive. So how and what questions were things that we used? We rarely asked why questions, because why questions sound accusatory. Why did you do that? And, oh, wait a minute, what are you accusing? So you're not developing trust with why questions. Occasionally we would use them, but it's pretty much how and what questions.
That's so interesting. Cause I think from a logical perspective, if I'm, I've never been in that situation, but wouldn't they know that's what you're doing? Behind the door, they don't know that's what you're trying. Cause if that's me, it's leave me alone. I know what you're trying to do. I'm going to do what they don't put that together. It's
so if you
emotional.
Think about what we do, we've all been to the park where there was a seesaw or a teeter-totter. So when we start negotiating, the person's emotional brain, their emotional side, way up in the air, their rational brain down in the ground. And so what we do is we just ask you open-ended questions. We want you to talk and burn off a lot of that emotional energy so that we can kind of bring that teeter-totter to equilibrium. And then after asking some more questions, eventually you get to the point where the rational brain is up in the air and the emotional brain is down on the ground. And we all know we make better choices for ourselves when we use our rational brain as opposed to our emotional brain. So that's our ultimate goal, to get you to a point. I don't care how many hours it takes to get you to talk and talk. And so we would use silence. We talk to each other and then the person would stop talking. And we don't like that uncomfortableness, that we don't like that silence. It makes us uncomfortable. But we had to resist trying to fill that silence because the person would start to feel, they were like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I got to start talking again. Yes, thank you very much. That's exactly what we want you to do. So we would use silence to our benefit. And people used to always say to us, great job, you talked that person out. What we really did was listen the person out. Listening. The importance of listening, and I even put a chapter in my book about this, the importance of listening, not listening to respond, but listening to understand. You may say something, it could be like, hurry up, Scott, say what you're going to say because I want to get my 2 cents in. Or, okay, Scott, I understand what I hear what you're saying, may agree with you, may not agree with you, but help me to understand where you're coming from. Now we're engaging in a dialogue. Now we're talking like 2 human beings. And I think societally, we've gotten to the point where, if I don't agree with you or you don't agree with me, somehow you're a bad person. And I don't know when that happened, but we've got to get away from that and get back to, okay, we may not agree with each other, but help me understand where you're coming from.
Do you see, and I 100% agree. I think that, if you can, most people, if you just have a conversation with them one-on-one versus through social media or you could come to a reconciliation of, okay, we'll disagree, but no big deal. Let's go get lunch. And now it's, you go to any social media. It's no, you can't do that. But do you see any similarities or anything you took from that idea of building that trust with negotiating like that to being able to motivate and coach people through whatever specific goal they want? Because as someone who does coach people, one of the biggest things that we find is that if they don't trust you, like, and you don't number one, if you don't listen to them and you don't listen to kind of their issues they have, whatever it might be, and you kind of just impose your thoughts onto them and make them do what you want to do, they won't trust you and they won't see results. So do you see that kind of, I guess, how would you attach those similarities together?
Oh, absolutely. Totally. If somebody doesn't trust you, they're not going to do what you want them to do, either out of spite or because they're like, no, you're kind of an idiot, and I think we should go this way, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, and believe me, we got it wrong sometimes. I mean, we would say something and the person would say to us, I'll give you an example, so people that are contemplating suicide, and this happened probably about 10% of the time that we dealt with somebody, they chose, and again, it was their choice, they chose to end their life because they knew when they came out, they were going back to prison. And they're like, you know what, I'm not going to do the rest of my life. I'm just going to end it right here. So we would ask people, hey, John, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or whatever it ended up being. And if you're wrong, if they're not thinking about it, they will literally fire on you. Be like, no, Scott, you're an absolute idiot. I'm not thinking about killing myself. But if they are, you open the window, you open the door to start talking about it and things like that. So, even I give this to your audience, if you have a friend, if you have a relative and you think they might be wanting to harm themselves in some way, don't think that by you suggesting it or you bringing it up, that somehow you're going to plant the seed and they're going to go ahead and do the act. It's just the opposite. If you think they're going to do something, you ask them, hey, Scotty, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you, I know you've got a gun. Are you going to shoot yourself? Because if you're not, you're going to fire on me with, no, Terry, you're an idiot. I'm not going to do that. But if you are, I've just given you the opening that you need to maybe, oh God, somebody cares. Somebody's listening. Oh yes, let me tell you my story. Let me tell you why I feel the way I feel. So yes, trust is the overarching point, I think, in any relationship. And, a hostage negotiator and a hostage taker, that's a relationship, whether we like it or not. So yes, it's very important that you listen. And I think it's even more important, okay, you listen and then you parrot back to them what they said. Hey, Scott, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, X, Y, and Z. Because if I got it wrong, I want you to tell me that I got it wrong. Because like I said, I'm human. I make mistakes. That's okay. But if I just think, you know what, I know exactly what you need and I'm going to tell you what you need, you're never going to get anywhere with people. You've got to have that trusting relationship.
Let me tell you what you're going to think right now. Let me tell you what you're going to need. Oh my God, that's amazing. Okay. So when you were doing this, was this the initial development of your 4 truths, or did this come afterwards?
This came afterwards. The 4 truths came afterwards.
The 4 truths. Okay, so what? So
4
what
truths
are
came
the,
after? I'm sorry. Yes.
4 truths came afterwards. Okay, but did the learning all of this kind of help mold the 4 truths?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what are what are the 4 truths that you have?
So the 4 truths are: number 1, control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. Number 2, embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life. And it doesn't have to be cancer or even any kind of an illness. And use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. Number 3 is, the way I look at it, kind of more of a legacy truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then number 4, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So those are my 4 truths. Those are what I kind of call the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to start to build a quality life off of.
And is that the 4 truths what you normally teach when you do speaking or motivational, seminars, stuff like that?
I do. I think they're, again, I offer them to you. If they work for you, by all means, take them, incorporate them in your life. If they don't, or maybe one does, then take that and develop your own truths around it. I'm not saying these are the only truths in the world. I call them my 4 truths, but they're not mine. I don't think you can own a truth in any way. They're just things that I really feel are important, and at least to me have helped me in my life.
I love that. So I want to dive into at least one or two of them to kind of see, get your thoughts on it. So I love the control your mind or control you. What I talk about a lot, and what a lot of people struggle with, at least in the goal achieving field, and I my expertise is in in fitness, health, but this really does apply to everyone. If you're in a career, relationship, whatever, it's a lot of people have this negative thought cycle where something bad happens, they get negative, they get down, and then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again. So during your time of, speaking to people, whatever, maybe even coaching, what are some of the common themes that you see with people who have that negative cycle of they're really not controlling anything. They're allowing their environment or situation to control them. And then secondly, what are some of your, top, tricks or tips to like kind of break that cycle to start seeing kind of a, to gain back control of your life? Because a lot of people, like, especially if you're losing weight, for example, they feel out of control. You're up 100 pounds. You feel you have no control of food, barring an addiction, whatever it might be. You just feel like you have no control of your life, or you're a dead end job, or your relationship sucks. You have no control, and you just keep constantly thinking these horrible thoughts. How do you what are the signs for that? And how do you break that?
I think the first thing, and I stress this incredibly important point, I think, with everybody, be very, very, very careful how you talk to yourself. Because if you think about, and I'll use a basketball analogy because I like basketball, the same part of your brain that lights up when you shoot free throws, for example, is the same part of your brain that lights up when you think about shooting free throws. So if you're the kind of person that's like, you know what, yeah, my job sucks, this sucks, this is terrible, I'm never going to get out of this. If you keep saying that enough, eventually you're going to get to the point where it's like, yeah, your job sucks and you're right, you're never going to get out of this, because you're hardwiring your brain with that constant negative overtone. And I remember I learned this truth probably early in my life. I was 15 years old. I had 3 knee surgeries in high school. And I remember when I went back playing after those knee surgeries, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since your surgeries, and college coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I realized I had to change the narrative. I had to change the dynamic in my mind. And I used to tell people, you just need to change the way you're thinking. And I've read more, I've educated myself more, and I think it's a little bit more complex than that. There are some people, I am not one of them, there are some people that just take that negativity, that take that, you stink, you're not any good, there's no way you're going to be, and they just use that and burn it as fuel. It's like, oh no, tell me some more. They are so motivated by that I would tell those people, just stay with that. If people are telling you bad stuff and it motivates you to work harder and get better, then do that. I am kind of in the second phase where, yes, I'm going to take whatever that negative thought is, and I'm going to turn it into something positive. I guess let me step back for a second. We all have negative thoughts. I don't care how positive you are. I don't care what a great person you are. From time to time, you're going to have negative thoughts come into your mind. Don't get all excited about it when it happens. We're human beings. That's just the way life is. So take those negative thoughts and change them into something positive and put it in your brain. Like, no, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level. So, and coaches are still reaching out. So I've taken that negative stuff that my brain's put into my mind and I've changed it to something positive. So that's the second way to kind of look at it, depending on the type of person you are. And then the third way, some people can't get that close to it. Some people need some distance away from that. And so they are like, well, hey, maybe that person, it's sort of sort of looking at yourself from a third person perspective and changing that with a third person to, Terry Otto, I think Terry's playing at a pretty high level. And I know Terry's got some coaches that are sending him letters and things like that. So you remove yourself a little bit from that, because some people can't deal with, that negativity being right on top of them. For me, it works. And I kind of fall into that second category. I wouldn't do good with, well, yeah, Terry's still playing good and coaches are still reaching. No, I need to have it. I need to own it. Some people can't own it. They need to have a little distance from it. So it depends on the type of person you are as to what I would suggest would work for you to sort of change that negativity into something positive. But if you do it, if you stay consistent with it, you will eventually get there. It may not happen, next week or even next month, but eventually you'll get to the point where your brain will start to expect something positive as opposed to something negative.
Do you think that because we all have negative thoughts. I mean, like
Sure.
you said, like it's just,
Yeah.
it's, and some more than others. And, do you think that these negative thoughts are just innate on like, we just happen to worry, that's what we are? Or do you think a lot of it comes from, past, I don't want to use the word trauma because, a lot of people don't have necessarily specific trauma, but using trauma as an umbrella term of like, they had something that happened when they were a kid and they used that, they molded it, and it became this fear of inadequacy or self-doubt or whatever. Do you think it comes from that? Or do you think it's just something we have? We're always just thinking about negative things.
I think it can be both. I think the first part of, just negative thoughts come into your brain. It would be like if you got up this morning, Scott, and said, okay, I'm going to go skydiving. Your brain would immediately be like, oh, wait a minute, Scott. Heck no, absolutely not. The plane might crash. Your parachute may not open. So your brain starts putting all that negative stuff in there more as just a self-preservation mechanism, but that's the problem with it. To preserve yourself physically, you're never going to grow. You're just going to stay in this little comfort zone, in this little box that, everything's great, everything's fine. No, don't want to step outside that comfort zone because, my brain's going to start attacking me and I don't like that. The only way you're going to grow is if you do that. If you step outside that comfort zone and say, yeah, you know what? Plane might crash, parachute may not open, but you know what? I'm motivated to go skydiving this morning, so I'm going to do it. So you override that part of it. Now, the trauma part of it, again, that can get sticky. And I'm not an expert, I'm not a mental health expert by any means, although, I think in a lot of ways my SWAT negotiating days sort of qualifies me as that. But yeah, a lot of the times we were negotiating with people, they did have a mental illness, and we would negotiate when we would practice, and then we'd meet with, we debrief, and the psychologist would be, did you ever think maybe this person has schizophrenia and they're maybe off their meds, or they're, and it's, oh yeah, I never thought about that. So that part, their mental illness or their trauma, they were abused as a kid or something like that. And so, but again, I still think that goes back to people who your brain's just trying to protect you. So they're don't do that. No, don't get involved in that relationship. That person might hurt you, which goes back to, well, my father beat me when I was a kid, or my father sexually assaulted me when I was a kid. So don't get in that relationship because it's just your brain trying to protect you.
Yeah, I like that. So, I mean, it's a good perspective on that. So what about, I think a lot of people fall into the phase 2, I think is what you mentioned. Phase 1 is definitely not me, where it's like you get yelled at and then you use that anger.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me, it kind of reminds me of Thor Ragnarok, where Thor's talking about his anger, his vengeance. It's a great motivator. And I'm like, I'm not about that life.
I'm not either. Right. Yeah.
I'm like, I like, if I get yelled, and I was on track in high school, and they would yell at us, I'd be like, I'm the guy who goes, go pound sand. And I'll tell the coach that to them. I'm like, I don't care what you say, like, shut, or I just won't work hard for you. And that doesn't do it for me. Right. So, let's assume that the people listening aren't in that category. I feel like those are easy people to coach, I feel like, and they're able to kind of turn that. So, but more so, and I don't think I talk to myself in the third person either. I think that was more of the phase 3 aspect. So I kind of want to focus on the phase 2 part. If someone's in that phase 2, what are some things that you've seen work in order for them to kind of flip that script in their head?
Yeah, we are so conditioned to want immediate results. It's like, well, if I say something, I take a negative thought and I turn it into positive, I'm going to be positive. All of a sudden the glass is going to be half full instead of half empty. It just doesn't happen that quickly. It just does. So I mean, it really is as simple as understanding that, first of all, you've got to recognize there's got to be a cognition that, oh, that's a negative thought. I don't like that. And okay, fine. You've recognized it. And now you turn it into something positive for yourself. And then you repeat it, and say it. I mean, actually say it out loud. I know, if you're in the middle of a meeting, you can't say, yeah, I'm going to get this account. It's like, okay, yeah, don't do that if you're in sales or anything like that. But if you are in a place where you can physically say it, because, and the reason that that's important is now your mind, your brain hears it. It's not something that's abstract where, it's just a thought. It's now something tangible that, you just said something that goes in your ears, it registers in your mind, and it stays there for a second. And if you can do that, so I encourage people to say stuff out loud. It was a negative thought. Know what? Terry's playing great basketball right now. Say that. Tell yourself the good stuff that's going on in life. Again, if your mind, if you're sitting there saying, if your thoughts are, man, I'm terrible at algebra. There's no way I'm going to do well in this test. I mean, I think about guys that I went to college with who would go out drinking the night before, and then, they would be hungover. They'd come into the test the next morning. What's the first thing they would say? Oh, I'm going to blow this test. There's absolutely nobody ever says, hey, I really paid attention during the semester. I know I'm going to do well on this. Nobody says that. Yeah. Why? Why do we not go to the positive? It goes back to our brains wanting to protect us. It's like, yeah, you went out drinking last night. You're hungover. Statistically, you're probably not going to do very good on this test. So to protect yourself, you're going to tell yourself you're not going to do that. Nobody goes into it and says, yeah, I'm drunk as a skunk, but by God, I'm going to ace this test.
So it's almost like a coping mechanism.
It is.
So negativity is a coping mechanism. So what I'm hearing you say, just want to make sure I get it right. So basically the two things is kind of what people can do if they find themselves having this negative self-talk, like I hate my job, I hate this. Oh my gosh, this isn't working. I just can't lose the weight. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. I'm too fat. Whatever the issue is that they're having. Number one, identifying that you're saying it in your head, that those thoughts have occurred, and then using repetition over and over and over again by breaking that neurological pathway out loud. If you can, obviously, if you can. I mean, if you're in a meeting, like you said, like you probably just do it in your head, but out loud if you can. It's that's a negative thought. I should probably either say stop or say change, or just say, okay, like, why am I thinking that right now? And just really have that self-reflection on repeat over and over again throughout the day when you can. That's kind of one of the, things you tell people to do.
That's exactly what I tell people to do. And the other thing I'll say this much. We are great at, when we run up against an impediment, something happened, our job sucks. I didn't get my driver's license because I failed or whatever it ends up being. We don't take personal responsibility for our own success and happiness. We got to blame somebody. We got to find, I'm going to blame my parents, or I'm going to blame my boss, or I'm going to blame my station in life. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. So let me add that onto it too, that you need to take the responsibility. This isn't somebody else's problem. Nobody else is going to come to your aid. If you want to fix this, you need to fix it. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Take that personal responsibility for your success and happiness.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. I think especially with the younger generation right now, it's, and right or wrong, and everyone has their own background, their own, where they grow up, but it's this victim mentality of like, oh, woe is me, something's against me. It's like, okay, well, look, life's not fair, get over it, and then try your best. Look, it's like you think your life's not fair, go to a different country too. Let's see how fair your life. I mean, there's people don't realize how good they have it, at least in the U.S. Okay, like but there's a lot of countries out there you can't do a lot of things that you can do in the U.S. and it's like, oh, it's so bad. It's like if you tell yourself it's not your fault, then there's nothing you can do to change it. And then you kind of have that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, that's just like the idea.
Gosh, my brother is the president of Marist High School in Chicago. And the Marist brothers sent him to Guatemala to review the high school in Guatemala, third world country. Yeah. He said, I get off the plane 11 o'clock at night. There's nobody in the airport but a bunch of armed guards with AK-47s. We're put into a convoy that's armed. We go to a compound that's armed. And he said, eventually we went up into the hills. We went up into the mountains to the school. And he said, I was talking to the principal and I said, how do you guys handle, fighting and bullying and, suicide and all that kind of stuff? And he said, the principal kind of looked at me like, what are you talking about? So, well, how do you handle it here when your kids, bully each other, they, contemplate suicide, or there's mental illness? He's like, we don't have that here. He said, these kids live in huts with dirt floors that have no heat, that have no air conditioning. They farm after school until, the sun goes down. They realize the only way to get out of this, abject poverty, which is really what it is to get an education. So there's no bullying, there's no mental illness. They realize this is our only way out of here, and we're going to give ourselves every chance we can to be successful at it. It's kind of a first world problem that we deal with.
Yeah, it's almost like the problem of victimhood comes from prosperity in some form. Now, you might not, you could be living in the South Side of Chicago, but it's still better than you know, certain other places who don't ever. It's like, wow, that's crazy. I didn't know. I had no idea. That's crazy. The one other part of the truth I wanted to kind of quickly, actually, well, I want to hit another part. I think people are probably going to yell at me not to ask this question. So I'm like, hey, like you talked about when people identify a negative thought. What I found a lot is, what if it doesn't come as a negative thought necessarily? What if it comes as almost like just a routine of like, this is just what I do. And it's not necessarily negative in your mind, but it leads to that negative result that we're talking about. So someone's not saying I'm not good if I can't lose weight, even if that's their underlying problem, that's what they actually feel. They're not saying that in their head, or they're just, oh, I see food, I'm going to eat it as a defense mechanism. Is there a way to like, okay, I'm not actually saying that to myself, but I still, I'm still doing these things?
Boy, that's a great question. And I don't know if I have a good answer for you, to be honest with you. I was reading a book recently. It's called Do Hard Things. It's by a guy by the name of Steve Magnus. I would recommend it to you and certainly your audience. And he talks about, said this researcher did a very simple study. He put people, and mostly young people, in a room with no devices, no cell phone, no laptops, no iPads, nothing. The only thing that was in the room was a table, a chair, and a buzzer. And the buzzer, if you press the buzzer, you would get a shock. You would get an electric shock. And he said, I want you to be in here for 15 minutes. 15 minutes, think about that, 15 minutes. 67% of the men shocked themselves. 25% of the women shocked themselves, including one guy who shocked himself every 4.7 seconds during that 15 minutes. And I guess part of what I think where it needs to start is we need to be comfortable with being alone with ourselves, because when we're alone, and I do this every day. I'm up to about 20 minutes a day where I just sit in a chair and there's nobody around. I don't have any devices. I don't care where your mind goes. I don't care what you think about, but I'm telling you, if you start there, if you start with that point where you can be comfortable being alone with yourself, eventually you're going to get to the part where you're going to start understanding what's going on in your head. I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but it's kind of what came to me, through this is to be comfortable being alone with yourself. Because if you can be alone with yourself, eventually you will start to understand the type of person you are, the type of issues you have, the type of goals you have, and things like that. Because I think if you asked a lot of people what their goals were, they could probably tell you that. But what they couldn't tell you is, what are your values? And if you don't have your goals tied to your values, there's a reason why New Year's resolutions, 90% of them fail by, the middle of February. There's a reason why so many goals fail, because you don't tie them to anything concrete. So if you don't know your values, then it's going to be hard to achieve your goals. What are you willing to die for? What are you willing to give your life for? If you can come up with those hard questions, then I think you're probably on the road to saying, well, I kind of understand why I want that piece of chocolate cake, but I also understand why I probably shouldn't have it.
Wow,
I don't know if that helps you or not. But...
Well, it does, because and just to from my understanding of what you just said is basically it's when you're alone, it's almost a direct path to self-reflection. So basically, if you're not actually thinking these things, then force yourself to basically, be by yourself for 5 minutes, 10, 20 minutes, and then these thoughts will come. And you'll be able to identify it. So if you're not actively, oh my gosh, like I don't actively get negative, sit in a room alone, force yourself to think about it, because what you might be doing is using food, using other people as a support system versus dealing with yourself internally and ignoring your problems. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to have to try that now. I meditate, but there's a specific thing I'm trying to do when I meditate.
Exactly.
So Okay, so sit in the room, maybe 10 minutes with a buzzer.
Start out with 5. Just start, you be alone with yourself for 5 minutes. And the scary thing is, I mean, I'm old, so I like being alone, but young people don't like that. I mean, they need that camaraderie, they need that togetherness and things like that. But if you can't be alone with yourself, you've got a huge problem. I mean, we've got to be able to be alone with ourselves and our thoughts.
Yeah, and I think, and not to get off a tangent, but I think that society has indoctrinated the younger generation to not want to be alone, because it's all about social media. It's all about staying connected. You need, the dopamine hits on every little like, and so everyone needs. There's this guy on Dr. Phil who, like, I'm not sure if it was even real or not, but he was like, I don't talk to my parents because they don't have enough followers on Instagram. It was like this. I was like, are you like this anyway? So, but I think it's a perfect example of, like, we can't be alone because we just need this, we need everyone to see our picture of our dog. Everyone to see this picture of this. And I'm guilty. I'm not above it. I'm guilty too. I'll post it. I want, the likes are great. And I want to be mindful of your time here. So I do want to hit, obviously you talked about, still overcoming cancer and still kind of dealing with it on a regular basis. You said every 3 weeks you go in for some testing. So I guess, I want to go with how did that start, and kind of how did you get to where you are right now with that?
Sure. So 2012, a little over 10 years ago, I was a girls' high school basketball coach in Houston, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. And so I didn't think much of it. But after a couple of weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment, went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he just showed it to me. A little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood. Nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a rare, incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think a melanoma is too much exposure to the sun and it affects the melon, the pigment in your skin. But I have a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And he recommended I go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston to be treated. So I had surgery to remove the tumor on the bottom of my foot, had surgery to move the lymph nodes. And then when I healed, because melanoma at that point in time was pretty much a death sentence, they didn't really have anything to treat it. So when I healed, my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to try to keep the disease from coming back. The side effects of the interferon were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. And that wasn't a cure. That was, as my oncologist used to say, trying to kick the can down the road and buy you more time. 5 years of interferon. Eventually, the drug became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was at a level 1 trauma center and they were able to stabilize me before sending me to the ICU. So I had to stop the interferon, obviously. And almost immediately, the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot where it had presented 5 years earlier. That necessitated 2018, the amputation of my left foot, 2 more surgeries in 2019. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated. And I also found out that I had tumors in my lungs, which I'm currently being treated for. So on that uplifting story,
I mean, first off, powerful story. I mean, just unbelievable, and just kind of go through that. So, I mean, I think when we talked about people find reasons to be victims now, it's like you have every reason to blame something else, whatever it might be. And yet you still have this, attitude of like, don't quit, and keep pushing through and embrace. And one of your truths is embrace the pain and difficulty. I guess, how do you stay positive? I mean, there's got to be days where it's like, oh my God, like just this, like just, and you can swear if you want to, just there's got to be days where it's just like, this is the worst. How do you stay, I guess, just in the right mental state throughout all of that?
I don't.
Okay.
I mean, you're looking at me right now. I mean, there's no S on my chest. I don't, have a cape and fly around with magical powers. There are days when I feel down. There are days I feel depressed. There are days I cry. But when that happens, I remember two stories, and these are both true stories. One, I remember this professor. Well, I don't remember it. I'm not that old, but there was a professor back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University who did a very simple experiment with rats. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as the rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he put those exact same rats in that exact same tank of water a second time. And on average, the rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, you're just not going to fail or not be successful. You're going to die. It's going to be over. The second time, 60 hours, which said to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. We have to believe, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next year, but at some point in time, our life will get better. And then number two, I think we all have a breaking point. I think we all have a point where I just can't do it anymore. But it's been my experience that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for. Our physical bodies can do so much more than we ever thought they can do. And the second story kind of dovetails with that. My wife works with a man who was a former Navy SEAL, and he's kind enough on my off weeks of treatment to call and just check on me and see how I'm doing. And we talk about what the SEALs call their 40% rule. And these are probably some of the toughest soldiers in the world. And basically what the 40% rule says is that if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, you can't go on. You're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So believe me, I have those bad days. I'm a human being. I'm not Superman. And I use those stories. It's like, yes, today sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace this suck, and I'm going to have to use it to the best of my ability. And that's what I do. When I found out I had cancer, I think I went through all the emotions we would equate with grief. First it was denial. Oh, I can't possibly have cancer. And then you get mad. And then I started to bargain with God. Our daughter was in high school at the time. It's like, look, just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I got down. And then I got to a point where it was like, you know what? This sucks, but I'm going to embrace this suck. I don't like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to play these cards to the absolute best of my ability. And I've been doing that for, if I can make it till April, it'll be 11 years.
Wow. That's an amazing story. And I love the mindset there. What would you tell someone who is, probably not going through anything similar, but it has that down, that's just like, okay, like they're down, they're negative, potentially suicidal, but they can't achieve their goals, like can't do what they want, maybe they're significantly overweight, whatever it is. Like, what is one thing that you would recommend that they do to maybe just get through it, or kind of change that as you get through it?
One of the things that I learned, and for me, it was from team sports. I started playing basketball when I was 9, played all the way up to college. I think whatever kind of team you're on, whether it's a family, whether it's, people you work with, whatever your team is, so to speak, what I learned from team sports was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, you let your coaches down, you let your fans down. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And I find another, like when I am feeling sorry for myself and I'm feeling down, what am I doing? I'm looking internally. I'm looking at, oh, Terry, oh yeah, you lost your leg and, things are bad and stuff like that. Excuse me. And yeah, they are. But I find, at least for me, what works, what helps me is to stop looking at me and my horrible situation and to start focusing outward. Who can you call? Who can you go visit? Who can you find? I mean, I go to the hospital all the time. I can always find somebody who's worse off than I am. Who can I make their life a little bit better?
How can
now
you
all of a
serve?
sudden, I'm not focused on me. I'm focused on somebody else. So I guess I would recommend stop focusing on yourself. Be responsible for your own success and happiness, and start by helping and making a positive difference in somebody else's life.
Man, I love that advice. And that's not even like, I don't think I've ever actually said that or given that advice before. So I really love that. It's powerful, because usually, you'll hear people say, just, think, there's got to be something you're grateful for, and you can't be negative and grateful at the same time. And so people say, go focus on the grateful, focus on yourself, and focus on things that you have in abundance versus scarcity, and versus what you don't have versus how life, has put you down. But the idea of focus on serving others is just such a monumental concept. And I think that I think in some way we're kind of designed to serve others, and to the most part, obviously, not all the way, but I think a lot of us, we love it. We feel better. Like when you volunteer somewhere, you feel so much better about, yourself and your life and everything when you do serve others. So I love that idea. I love that principle that you just gave. Wow. I mean, look, there's so much more we could go over, but I want to be mindful of your time and everything. So, where can people find you? Where can people find you? Let's go with that.
So I have a blog. It's called Motivational Check, and you can get that at motivationalcheck.com. Every day I put up a thought for the day, and with that thought usually comes a question about maybe how you could apply that thought in your life in some way. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which is usually a story or a video that I think it's a little bit longer than obviously, just reading a thought for the day. I have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. You can get access to my social media channels there. And you can also just leave me a message. And as long as it's in English and I can read it, I will get back to you. I mean, people send me some languages like, I have no idea what that person just asked me. So if you want to send me a message, please do it in English, because it's the only language that I speak. And I will absolutely answer it. But motivationalcheck.com will get you to me.
Awesome. And all of that information including the English part, will be in the show notes. So everyone can take a look at that. I highly recommend you go to it and get your motivational tips for the day and the blog post, everything like that. Terry, wow. I mean, it's unbelievable. I really appreciate your time and sharing everything that you just shared.
Well, Scott, thanks for having me on. I always say it's nice people like you that allow me to come on and have a conversation with them. And if that conversation makes a positive difference in somebody's life, then today's been a good day.
I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.